When it comes to the people closest to us, our friends, our family, the ones we laugh with, cry with, and lean on, it can be hard to imagine that something deeper might be at play when conflict arises. We're quick to chalk it up to personality differences, bad moods, or just a rough season in life. But if you stop there, you'll miss the real battle happening beneath the surface. Because life isn't only physical, it's spiritual. And if you never learn to see past the person to the spirit operating behind the person, you'll spend your energy fighting the wrong enemy. That's why discernment is so critical. Discernment is the ability to distinguish between what's natural and what's supernatural. It's the ability to ask not just, what is this person doing? But, what's influencing this person? Now, don't get me wrong, we're all human and we all make mistakes. But sometimes the anger, the jealousy, the bitterness that keeps showing up doesn't come from a random place. It has a root. And when the root is spiritual, no amount of surface level solutions will fix it. You see, people are vessels. Just like a cup can hold water, coffee, or juice, a person can hold different influences. Some people carry peace, joy, and wisdom because they've aligned themselves with God's Spirit. Others carry heaviness, confusion, and hostility because they've opened themselves, often unknowingly, to negative spiritual forces. And if you don't discern the Spirit, you'll find yourself blaming the cup instead of looking at what's inside it. Let me make this practical. Suppose you're in a conversation with a loved one, and no matter how gently you speak, they twist your words, escalate the tension, and leave you feeling drained. If you only see the person, you'll say, that's just how they are. They're impossible. But if you discern the Spirit, you'll recognize, wait a minute, this constant miscommunication and strife isn't just natural. Something spiritual is stirring this up. That awareness doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it helps you target the right enemy. You don't need to fight flesh and blood. You need to confront the Spirit behind it. Now, discerning the Spirit isn't about being suspicious or paranoid. It's not labeling everyone who makes a mistake as possessed or demonic. That's not wisdom. That's immaturity. True discernment requires humility. It means slowing down long enough to ask, is this reaction fueled by fear? Is this hostility driven by insecurity? Or is this bigger than just emotion? Does this have a spiritual fingerprint on it? And trust me, the more you train your eyes to see it, the more obvious it becomes. One of the ways you can tell is by the fruit it produces. The Bible says you will know a tree by its fruit. In the same way, you'll know a spirit by the atmosphere it brings. Does this person consistently bring division where there should be unity? Do they drain life instead of adding to it? Do they stir confusion when there should be clarity? Those aren't random character flaws. Those are signals of what spirit is at work. But here's the challenge. Sometimes the spirit working through a person is subtle. It hides behind charm, intelligence, or even religious language. That's why discernment isn't something you rely on your natural eyes for. You need spiritual eyes. You need prayer. You need wisdom. You need the courage to say, Lord, help me see this situation the way you see it. Because once you do, you stop wasting time being angry at people and start addressing the real source of the problem. And let me remind you, discerning the Spirit doesn't just protect you. It protects your relationships. If you recognize that a loved one is under spiritual attack, instead of cutting them off immediately, you can choose to pray for them, speak truth into their life, or set boundaries that don't condemn them, but expose the influence trying to use them. That's love with wisdom. At the end of the day, here's the reality. You cannot fight what you refuse to see. And if all you see is the person in front of you, you'll spend your life fighting the wrong battles, getting exhausted, and never walking in victory. But if you learn to discern the spirit, not just the person, you'll gain clarity, strength, and the authority to confront the real enemy. So the next time tension rises, pause. Don't just react to the words being spoken or the emotions being stirred. Ask yourself, what spirit is influencing this moment? Because the answer to that question may change the way you respond, and it may save you from fighting the wrong fight. One of the mistakes we often make when dealing with people is treating every incident in isolation. Someone lashes out once, and we brush it off. They gossip another time, and we excuse it as stress. They sabotage progress yet again, and we tell ourselves, that's just their personality. But when you step back and look closely, you begin to notice something deeper. There's a pattern. And when there's a pattern, you're no longer dealing with just human weakness. You're seeing the fingerprints of a spiritual presence. That's the danger of ignoring repetition. A single event can be random. 2 might be coincidence. But 3, 4, 5 times, that's a cycle. And cycles aren't accidents. They're assignments. Demonic influence often works through consistency. It doesn't just show up once and vanish. It lingers, it repeats. It presses the same buttons over and over until it creates a stronghold. That's why discernment isn't just about noticing moments. It's about recognizing patterns. Think about it this way. If every time you interact with a certain person, you leave feeling smaller, weaker, and more confused, that's not random. If every family gathering turns into a battlefield of division, that's not coincidence. If every conversation with a friend ends in discouragement instead of encouragement, pay attention. The repetition is revealing something. And often, what it's revealing is that a spirit of destruction is at work. You see, the enemy doesn't need a brand new strategy for every person. He just needs a reliable pattern. If he knows jealousy can divide your family, he'll stir it up again and again. If he knows insecurity can silence your confidence, he'll whisper it repeatedly until it becomes your default thought. If he knows anger can ruin your relationships, he'll trigger it in cycles until it feels impossible to break. Patterns are his way of normalizing bondage. Now, let me make this personal. Imagine a relative who constantly undermines you. One moment it's subtle, the next it's direct, but every time you rise, they have a way of pulling you back down. At first, you might call it bad timing or personality clash. But after years of the same cycle, you have to admit, this isn't just them. Something deeper is fueling this consistency. And the moment you recognize the pattern, you've exposed the spirit behind it. Because spirits hide in repetition. This is where psychological depth matters. The human brain is wired to create pathways from repeated behavior. When something happens again and again, your mind begins to accept it as normal. That's why dysfunction in families often feels invisible, because it's been repeated for generations. But just because a pattern feels normal doesn't mean it's right. And just because you've tolerated it for years doesn't mean it isn't spiritual. In fact, the longer a destructive cycle has gone unchallenged, the more likely it has a demonic root. And here's the philosophical reality. Patterns are not just reflections of behavior, they're indicators of allegiance. A person can say they love God with their mouth, but if their life consistently produces destruction, hostility, and confusion, their pattern tells you who's really influencing them. That's why Jesus said, "By their fruits you will know them." He didn't say by their words or even their intentions. He said by their fruits, the repeated outcomes of their life. The good news is, once you see the pattern, you have the power to break it. Recognition is the first step toward freedom. When you call out a destructive cycle for what it is, you strip it of its disguise. You stop blaming the person exclusively and start addressing the spirit influencing the person. That doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior, but it does mean you target the real enemy instead of wasting your energy on symptoms. But let me warn you, ignoring the pattern has consequences. If you keep excusing repetition, it will eventually define the atmosphere of your home, your friendships, even your own soul. What you tolerate long enough becomes what you participate in. And if you're not careful, the very cycle you despise in others will show up in you. That's why you must be ruthless in calling patterns what they are. So here's the challenge: start paying attention. Don't just analyze events, trace the repetition. Don't just excuse behavior, study its cycle. Because the enemy doesn't hide in the unusual, he hides in the familiar. He thrives in the places you've stopped questioning. And until you see the pattern for what it is, you'll keep mistaking spiritual warfare for everyday life. The truth is simple. What repeats reveals what reigns. And once you know what reigns, you know what must be broken. If there's one thing you can never afford to overlook, it's the power of words. Words aren't just sounds in the air. They aren't just letters on a page. Words are carriers. They carry life or they carry death. They carry encouragement or they carry destruction. And when you're trying to discern what spirit is operating in someone, you don't have to guess. Just listen to what consistently comes out of their mouth. Because here's the truth. Words are windows into the soul. What people speak reveals what they're aligned with. That's why Jesus said, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." If bitterness fills the heart, bitterness will spill out of the mouth. If darkness fills the heart, darkness will show up in the language. And if a demonic spirit is influencing someone, you'll hear it in the tone, the repetition, and the weight of their words. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how one sentence from a person can shift the entire atmosphere? One cutting remark at the dinner table, and suddenly everyone feels tense. One sarcastic jab and joy evaporates. One whispered rumor and unity falls apart. That's not just communication, that's spiritual transfer. Words carry spirits. They plant seeds in the mind. They shape how we see ourselves, how we view others, and how we respond to life. On the psychological level, words program the mind. If you grow up being told you're worthless, you'll eventually believe it unless you counter it with truth. If you're surrounded by people who speak constant negativity, your brain begins to absorb it as normal. That's why the enemy loves to work through language. Because he knows words shape identity and destiny. He doesn't always need to attack with violence. Sometimes he just whispers through someone close to you, repeating lies until you agree with them. Now, here's the deeper part. Words not only reveal what spirit is influencing someone, they also invite that spirit into the atmosphere. When someone constantly speaks fear, they create an environment where fear thrives. When they speak division, they open the door for hostility. When they gossip, they give access to a spirit of strife. You don't have to be a theologian to notice it. Just pay attention to what conversations leave you drained and what conversations leave you lifted. And let me be clear, this doesn't mean you should be quick to cut people off every time they say something wrong. We all stumble with words. But when negativity, slander, discouragement, or hostility become the consistent language of a person, you're not just dealing with personality. You're dealing with spiritual influence. Because the spirit you're under will always leak out through the words you use. Consider the example of someone who never has anything uplifting to say. No matter what blessing you share, they find a way to diminish it. No matter what progress you've made, they remind you of your flaws. Over time, that's not just a bad habit, that's a strategy. Because the enemy knows he can't always stop you directly. But if he can discourage you through someone's words, he can slow you down. And when you start agreeing with those words, you unknowingly agree with the spirit behind them. That's why Scripture teaches us to test the words we hear. Do they align with truth? Do they bring peace, clarity, and hope? Or do they stir confusion, division, and despair? That's your litmus test. Because when God speaks, even through people, there is light, direction, and life. When the enemy speaks, even through people, there is darkness, deception, and death. So here's the wisdom. Don't just listen to what people say, listen to what their words produce. Do they bring people together or push them apart? Do they speak life into your dreams or choke them with fear? Do they fan the flame of faith or pour water on it? The outcome tells you what spirit is speaking. And here's the challenge, watch your own words too. It's easy to point fingers at others, but ask yourself, what atmosphere do my words create? Am I unknowingly allowing frustration or bitterness to be the mouthpiece of something darker? Or am I speaking in a way that reflects God's spirit of life and truth? Because at the end of the day, words are never neutral. They are vehicles. And every time we open our mouths, we are carrying something into the world, either the influence of God's Spirit or the influence of another. The question is, whose words are you letting speak through you? And whose words are you allowing to shape you? Remember this, words are not lightweight. They are loaded. And when you start paying attention to the weight of someone's words, you'll discover the spirit they're carrying. If there's one strategy the enemy has never stopped using, it's division. Demons don't always need to destroy you with an earthquake or a tragedy. Sometimes all they need to do is quietly break unity in your relationships. Because the truth is, division is destruction in slow motion. It weakens the foundation until everything collapses. And if you want to spot where demonic influence might be working in your friends or family, pay close attention to where division keeps showing up. See, division is subtle. It doesn't always come with loud arguments and slamming doors. Sometimes it starts with little seeds. Jealousy here, comparison there, a misunderstanding that nobody clears up, a rumor that keeps spreading. Before long, what used to be a strong bond becomes a fragile thread. And the enemy smiles because he knows that if he can divide people who should be united, he doesn't even have to attack from the outside. They'll implode from the inside. On the surface, division looks like human conflict. But if you zoom out, you'll see it's spiritual warfare. The Bible tells us that where there is envy and strife, there is confusion and every evil work. That means division doesn't just create a little tension. It opens the door for every other kind of attack. Once unity is broken, protection is weakened, trust is gone, and the enemy has free access to sow chaos. Think about your own family. How many times has an inheritance dispute torn siblings apart for decades? How often has one misunderstanding between relatives turned into years of silence? How many marriages collapse, not because of one major betrayal, but because small divisions piled up until love was buried under resentment? Those aren't just accidents of human nature. They're the favorite weapons of demonic influence. On a psychological level, division thrives on ego. When both sides feel they have to be right, reconciliation becomes impossible. Pride takes the driver's seat, and soon the relationship veers off the road. Demons exploit this because they know that pride blinds you from seeing truth. As long as you're convinced the other person is the enemy, you won't recognize the real enemy manipulating both of you from behind the scenes. And here's the philosophical truth. Division is not just the absence of peace. It's the presence of sabotage. When two people or a group of people who are meant to build together turn against each other, the very purpose of their unity is lost. That's why demons love to attack families, marriages, churches, and close friendships, because those are the very places where unity was designed to carry power. Break the unity, and you neutralize the power. Now let's make this practical. Suppose you notice that whenever one particular person is around, arguments seem to break out. Conversations that were calm suddenly turn tense. Trust that was solid begins to fracture. That's not just coincidence. That's a spirit of division using a willing vessel. The person may not even realize it, but their presence has become an open door for strife. And if you're not discerning, you'll waste your energy fighting the person instead of resisting the spirit behind them. But here's the hope. Division loses its power when you expose it. The moment you recognize that a spirit of division is at work, you stop falling for the bait. You stop letting petty issues pull you into war zones. You start confronting the root instead of the surface. That might mean setting boundaries with the person who constantly stirs division. It might mean refusing to repeat gossip, even when it feels tempting. It might mean humbling yourself to forgive, even when pride wants to hold on. And let me add this. Unity doesn't mean agreement on everything. Unity means choosing not to let disagreements destroy the relationship. The enemy isn't threatened by disagreement, but he trembles at unity. Because when people are united, whether in family, faith, or friendship, there's a strength that can't be easily broken. That's why division is always his favorite weapon. It's simple, it's effective, and it works, unless you recognize it and resist it. So don't be fooled by the surface conflict. When you see constant division in your circle, stop and ask, who really benefits from this strife? Who really wins if we stay divided? The answer will always be the same, the enemy. And the moment you see that clearly, you've already taken the first step in disarming his favorite weapon. Remember this, unity is power, and division is defeat. So guard your unity like treasure, because the moment you lose it, you've given the enemy the upper hand.